So I think we've seen some welcome change in the last calendar year, maybe a little bit more. But I'd like to kind of hear from everybody on this panel to kind of how can we create a better environment for players, for staff, and for Black baseball fans.
Well, I'll start it off. First of all, thanks for having me. I think it's a fantastic panel. You got right people on here. But Gabe, I want to go back, to last year when we had all the protests in baseball. I know baseball was late to the game, so to speak. But as we went through the protests and the Brewers and a couple other teams, and then it just became a tidal wave across the league, as we led, really, I go back to opening day and even before, you were the first manager to kneel. You were one of the first baseball players to kneel at the anthem, and that didn't go unnoticed. So I think as I look back over the last year, what stood out to me, and it was so powerful with the Brewers and the Reds walking off, was that each of those clubs have a maximum of maybe 2 African-American players on their teams. So essentially what went down in Milwaukee and Kenosha in that area, you saw some white teams walk off and say, this is not right. And then to have a manager of yourself leading the charge of a whole organization and a team and a sport is powerful, because it's not going to be done by the black and brown colors that you see on the screen. It's going to be a combination of everybody. And to me, the message was so powerful to see somebody that was white that was leading the way. Because for years, as Renel will get into, and I'm sure the others, you can fight, but unless somebody is coming with you, and particularly of the white persuasion, there's not a whole lot of change going to happen. So that to me was encouraging to know that was a big difference than any year I've been involved in civil rights or in pro sports or whatever. So I'll turn it over to Renel and she can jump off of that.
Okay. Thank you, Gabe, for having me. Good to see everybody. I will never forget that night when Gabe took the knee, and not just Gabe, but several of our players as well. And they consistently did that throughout the shortened season last year. It was Gabe, it was Hunter Pence, it was Yaz, Pablo was with us, Mauricio Dubon, Austin Slater, and like you say, Harold, I mean, what I've been saying, because I've had so many discussions and panels and town halls over the last year, and like reiterating on what Harold said, we didn't create this problem. We didn't create racism. So it's not our job to fix it. And we can't fix it without y'all. And so that had such a huge impact on me. And I don't think Hunter Pence will mind me sharing this, but I was at the ballpark the day you guys were getting on the bus to go down to LA, I think, to open the season. And Hunter specifically made a point of coming over to see me before I went to my car. And he had tears in his eyes. And he was just expressing to me how moved he was by all of this, how angry he was by all of this, how much he wanted to learn, how much reading he was doing, how much he wanted to be a better ally. But the most important thing he shared with me was he said that taking a knee in support of this cause would be the most important thing he ever did on a baseball field. And that's saying a lot. Not being an all-star, not being an MVP, not winning a World Series. And that's what we need. And that's what I saw happening last year. That was the change. You all stepped up for us. And for me, with the front office staff, I had people reach out to me that had never reached out to me in 21 years, checking on me and my emotional state, A, and B, how can I support you and how can I be better? And quite frankly, I've been having these conversations, for 2 decades that have pretty much gone unnoticed. So I just appreciate the effort of you, Skipper, and the players and the team and Farhan in really taking the stand and taking a lot of heat for it as well, having the Black Lives Matter sign on the scoreboard and in Willie Mays Plaza. So it's very much appreciated. And it's something that I know I had been waiting on for a long time to see that kind of reaction and support.
It's great. I actually remember the moment in LA. Hunter was very passionate about making sure that other players knew his position on the matter. And I think that was, I think he saw it at the time as being one of the more important things that he was going to do in his baseball career. To your point of having shared that with you, I think in action, I saw that unfold. So it's really good to kind of see that reflected in the conversation that he had with you. LaMonte, I wanted to kick to you. I remember talking to Rocco Baldelli about you before or right after we made the acquisition. And he talked about how passionate you were about some of the things that you saw in the last calendar year. And I just kind of like to hear your perspective on some of the things that Harold and Renel kicked off. That's all right.
Absolutely. First, thanks for having me. But yeah, last year in Minnesota, it sounds like we were kind of doing the same things that you guys were doing here in San Francisco. You know, I remember we were in Detroit when we had a team meeting about whether or not we were going to play that night. And instantly we had guys standing up, raising their hands, talking and telling like, hey, like, we're not going to play this game tonight for this reason. And, you know, it was just really cool seeing. And these weren't people of color. These were Caucasian guys, Latin guys who all wanted to step up and show their support for the African-American community. Also wearing the T-shirts out there every day for batting practice and answering in press conferences and actually bringing it up themselves in press conferences, which is really cool. And then that's the side conversations that you would have, individual conversations, just asking how you're doing, how the family's doing, everything like that. I mean, it just shows how powerful we can be when we come together. I feel like we sent that message with putting the Black Lives Matter on the scoreboard and the George Floyd on the wall out there in right field. Just many things that we can do, but we got to continue to keep doing it to keep these conversations going so that stuff like that cannot be in our everyday lives.
What's your position now? And actually, I'm curious about Renel, your take on this, since some of that kind of kneeling and protesting has stopped. And I think one of the things that Lamonte's mentioned to me is just kind of some of the frustration about how important it was a year ago, but like, why is it not equally important now? I don't know. What's your response to that, LaMonte?
It's just, I feel like it's got to be, we're reactionary. Like I feel like we need to be more progressive, and because it keeps happening. And then, but when it stops for a little bit, we just kind of forget it and put it on the back burner. And it's just kind of like, you just got to wait until the next one happens. But I feel like we need to be more getting out into these communities and it's like showing our faces and showing that we can be a resource as the San Francisco Giants to show that we're here to support in any way that we can. And I don't know what that is, but I feel like if we can find that answer by working together.
Well, for me, what's also been really impactful this past year is we now have several employee resource groups, and our Black group is called Black Excellence. And each ERG is able every month to give a presentation and, share with what's going on, share our emotions, share our feelings, share what things we'd like to change. I have never had more conversations with management than I have in the last year. To Larry Bear's credit, he's heard me, he's listened to me, he schedules a call with me every other week. Because I told him that first conversation I had last summer when he wanted to talk to me about my life experiences, my experiences with the Giants, which I did, and appreciated them lending their support. But what I said to him was, well, it's my job now to keep my foot on the gas and to continue to hold you all accountable. And that's what I've been doing. Regular conversations with him, regular meetings within our ERG to find out, are there any things we need to address within the front office, and continuing to speak out. So the important thing is that those of us, LaMonte, my baseball grandson, I hate for you to be in this position now and you're like on your way, right? And you're doing amazing. But when we have these faces, we're the ones that are chosen for this. And it's up to us to keep, like I said, to keep our foot on the gas, which I'm doing, because things have subsided. allies that reached out last summer have, ghosted me now. So I know the true allies that I have in my life that are really working on it. So my conversations with Larry involve, once we get back to normal, I'd like to see more outreach in the Bayview Hunters Point community, which is right down the street from the ballpark, which I've been saying for 20 years. I'm the only face they see. I'm the only face they see. And that goes back to my radio career. And they tell me that. The community is like, where are you guys? We need more player outreach. We need more volunteerism in that community. We need, when they start having their catered lunches on Fridays, how about you consider a Black-owned restaurant right down the street on 3rd Street? So I'm trying to bring all of that awareness to them and encourage them to get out specifically in that community that's right down the street. So that, we just have to, again, keep our foot on the gas. And I am encouraged, particularly with the way Larry has responded to me in the last year. And he has not let me down. And the other thing I've also been working on is, we had that controversy with one of our principal owners, Charles Johnson. And I've been working with Larry on that and those, the troublesome and controversial donations to political candidates that Charles Johnson made, not just last year, but in 2018. So we just have to stay on it and hold them accountable. And that's what I'm doing, trying to.
Fernando, I'll let you talk, man, before I jump in. You haven't said nothing yet.
Hi, all. I was not in baseball last year, but what I found very fascinating from talking to people, you really realized not only baseball players, but everybody was learning. There are a lot of people sort of saying that it was becoming the buzzword. We're here to listen and learn. But of course, especially for the Black folks on the call, that's often not true. People are saying that they want to learn things. They actually don't want to learn things. They just want all of this to subside so that we can stop talking about Black stuff and get back to status quo. But what's super interesting is that the baseball player is the perfect example of a learning person, right? There's a reason that we're all here, Harold, LaMonte, Gabe. We've spent a sizable portion of our lives on a baseball field. I would actually argue that is what separates us culturally from the NBA. In the NBA, you have all of these Black men playing this ballet above the rim in Black Lives Matter hoodies. It's the blackest thing you've ever seen. And here in baseball, we're struggling it's a struggle. Culturally, we're just behind. We're 10 or 15 years behind. And I always kind of attribute that very, very simply to the fact that we're just on the field longer. We play more games, 162 games in 180 days. To get this good at baseball, you need to miss a sizable portion of life. And it's happening all the time, whatever kind of athlete you are. You miss class, you go to sports. You're not really focused on class, you're focused on sports. Class itself is not that good. There's a reason that we're all here, is because most of us never learned a lot of this American history in school, and that's by design. What's super fascinating about a lot of this stuff that, deals with reparations and all of that is there's so much logic to it. If somebody sat there and explained redlining to you for a long time, your perspective would change on a lot of things. So anyway, it's, I've said a lot of things there, but the point is, yes, we need to keep the gas on learning. And everybody should just be very comfortable with learning. I think we also have that feeling that we want to pretend that we know everything and not be sort of willing to learn more things and be curious about things. Everybody from baseball players to, decorated academics have tons and tons to learn. And so I think that it's interesting that, last year we were pushed to that brink and there was a lot of learning in clubhouses, sloppy or uncomfortable or not.
I think also you can liken it to business. We've watched how businesses have had to change the way they do their work. A lot of people haven't even been in their offices. Now they're working from home. Kids went to school online on a computer. Now they're hybrid, or maybe they're in school. And the same thing with sports and with where we're at. It was almost like a perfect storm of the internet and all of the intelligence and being able to share stories to movies that are One Night in Miami. You may not have ever known about Muhammad Ali and James Brown and Sam Cooke, and they all got together one night in Miami and had a conversation, to the movie where a black woman sent the brought them back from the moon. What? So there's all kinds of things that are happening now, of stories that are being told that were hidden for so many years. Speaking of hidden figures, but hidden for so many years. And now we're at this time where it's all being put out in front of us. And so now you have this big eruption with George Floyd and everything else going on. It seems like it's kind of, let's get through this, sweep it away, but you can't now because there's so much different access to it. My kids are learning about it, and it's studied in class now, where this would have happened 20, 30 years ago. So I guess what I'm saying is, if you went into the pandemic with a certain business plan, that doesn't work coming out. And the same thing in baseball. We have to understand what Renel was talking about. When we get out of this pandemic, and there's no excuse of, can't go to that soup kitchen, we're not cleared to go there yet, we're still, you need your mask and you got to make sure you're vaccinated before we do all this or that. When we are finally through this thing, we got to have a plan that makes this whole thing sustainable. That what did we learn, but how are we going to apply it coming out? And I think that's where we're at now. It's almost like we're sitting before the quiet of the storm again. And I appreciate the pandemic for where we're at, that we're still not fully wide open. So conversations are still being had, but the conversation has to shift, and it has to shift to, we got to have a plan when we come out, because the world's going to open up again. And so we need to have a plan, just like the Giants have a plan for when the stadium's going to open. We're going to have full capacity again at some point. What are we going to do? And I think the same thing needs to happen here in this conversation is, all right, we've gone through it. We've had engaging from all races, all conversations. People were open to conversations. We have some ideas. We have people we know we need to reach and plans. Then we need to now formulate saying, when we come out, we got to be ready to go. 2022, we really need to have outreach in those communities that are real. It needs to be part of the program that's built into all 30 major league teams. There's no excuses anymore. And there's ways to reach and do it. So that to me is where I think we're at now is, okay, we're in the formulating point. We've learned all the bad. We've learned all different things. We've learned some good people coming in. Everybody's got ideas. Now it's time to be ready for time to implement it, because we're going to get to that point eventually.
Oh, that's great. I think it's really interesting to see. We've got several generations of baseball players on this panel, and Renel has seen all, kind of all of those. And in particular, like Harold, I think your generation was slightly before mine. And then me and Fernando overlapped, but mine was kind of slightly before Fernando's, and obviously Fernando's slightly before LaMonte's. So I'm actually kind of curious from everybody's perspective, because I think it's helpful to go back and learn, like, what was it like for a minority player for you, Harold? And then I just kind of want to contrast that with, what it was like for a black player for you, Fernando, and then now for you, LaMonte, and some of the ways that we've gotten better, and then some of the ways that we need to continue to change going forward.
Well, I think for me, number one is opportunity. My first major league team I played on 1983 when I got called up, it was a 25-man roster. Then they expanded to 40. So of the 40-man roster, I would say we had 17 black players. And at that time in the big leagues, when I broke with the big club the following year, my first major league team, we had 15 black players on a 25-man roster.
Wow.
I had an instructional league team with 22-man roster, 18 were black.
Wow.
I mean, it's unheard of. And I think the first All-Star game I played in 1987, had, I think, 22 black players in the game, the All-Star game. I mean, so to me, it's opportunity, because when I was coming up, there wasn't travel ball. I wasn't worried about expenses. I wasn't priced out of the opportunity to play baseball. And I think we can talk about, black kids aren't playing and all the different things. It comes down to economics. And now that I have kids that are in that circle, there's only a few that can really even afford to play. You are going to pay $1,000 to $1,500 for your kid to participate, whether it's soccer, basketball, football, baseball, whatever. That's going to be an entry fee nationwide. That's where we're going to be. Now, I walk into a Dick's Sporting Goods the other day to go buy a bat, and it was $400 for a bat, and a glove was $250. And I'm getting ready to call Gabe and say, hey, man, call the Rawlings guy for me, But I mean, that's what's happened. And so with that, we've priced out the African-American kid. And now we take it to another level, and you go to college. So even if you were eligible to be given a scholarship, now there's 11.7 scholarships in college, and you got 25-man roster, you're splitting those scholarships up. So now they're coming to LaMonte and saying, hey, LaMonte, we'd love to have you come to school with us, but we can only give you 30% of the tuition. So you got to come up with $25,000, $30,000 a year. Who can do that? So in the African-American community, you're priced out. So if I'm 13 or 14, I'm talking to a kid about college, and I'm looking at football's got 85 scholarships. Baseball, I'm paying $25,000, $30,000 a year to go to school. I think at 13, you better start playing some football if I'm that parent, if you want to get to college. And so that's why I wrap it up in a big bow of opportunity. But that's what's changed since when I was a kid to Lamonte's generation, the travel ball generation. It's totally different. And so how do we fix it? We got to make the sport affordable. That's how I look at it. We invest so much money in so many things instead of making the sport competitively affordable is how you're going to get kids an opportunity to play. Because you play Little League, you play youth ball, all that. By the time you get to 10 or 12, now it becomes pricing. And that's where you lose the African-American athlete. And to me, that's how I see it. So I'll jump to the next elderly guy on the board. I guess I'll go to Fernando's group and say, what was it like when you were coming through, since you're right after Gabe?
Well, interestingly, as an Afro-Caribbean, I'm Afro-Cuban, I straddle two cultures. So I'm going to use this time to talk about something I think is really important and interesting because of, for many, many reasons, there are many Black Latinos who don't identify as Black. Now, there are lots of reasons for this, but the important thing here is there are people that look just like LaMonte, just like myself, just like Harold, who don't believe they are Black. They have essentially been scared into denying their own Blackness. That's a major, major problem in baseball. Why? Because the game is so Latin right now. So from what I was hearing from many, many players on all over rosters, talking with Edwin Jackson and Curtis Granderson, is that was a major point of contention in many, many clubhouses. There were a lot of Latin guys who were like, oh, no. I just dress like I'm Black and listen to Travis Scott. I'm not really, I don't do that stuff. And so I thought that was a really, really interesting, and that most people don't actually know that or really understand that. And that if that conversation continued, the Players Alliance and like all of these efforts in general would become a lot more fascinating. So what it was like, to play, when I was playing, obviously not very many Black players, of course. I'm African, I'm American. I'm kind of not considered African American because we're confused about race. They're just, boxes to check and things like that. The amount of times that I've completed forms that just are confused about what I am is just, kind of laughable. But I guess like in the last couple years of playing, when I was, like less of a rookie, because I think the culture of just being a rookie and just sort of like trying to just do what the elder white guys are doing culturally with everything that you do, that was still a part of my life. It's less a part of like LaMonte's generation. One of my favorite quotes, it's not even a black player, but my favorite quote is when Clevenger's always talking about sort of what this new generation of players is about. And Steve Clevenger was talking about how at the beginning of his career, he spent most of his life and most of his time kind of sitting at his locker, trying to like look the right way and do the right things. It's like not focused on baseball. So what's really, really exciting is that guys that are different, which, I'm sure LaMonte will speak on guys that are different, have a little bit more free reign to be themselves. I think the average player is spending less time sitting at his locker, wondering if he's offending any veterans by literally just breathing. So, I felt a little bit of that pressure for sure. But, I think that things were just confusing for many people as they didn't even know really how to react to me.
Gabe, I'm curious. What was your take?
I don't have anything strong. I mean, I obviously want to kind of hear a little more from LaMonte kind of kicking off.
Yeah, I was curious though, like the numbers when you were coming through, like, obviously we're talking about less than 8% African-American now. But when you were coming through the minors and into the big leagues, was there a lower percentage? Like I talked about 15 or so players on my teams.
Yeah, no, it was a much lower percentage. So much so that I feel like if you asked me about any one of my minor league teams or any one of my major league teams, I could tell you who, the one or two black players were on each of those. And I actually found it fascinating as you walked through the demographics from the time when you played, in contrast to, because my generation wasn't that far removed from yours. But it's shocking to me to hear that. And I guess the other take that I have is about the cost of baseball right now. And then my own personal experience with that. I grew up playing park league baseball. Like it wasn't even little league. It was, I walked down the street to the city park that was close to my house. It's $25 to play baseball at the time. I used a blue plastic baseball glove for the first couple of years of my existence. And, most of my stuff was just plastic, and that was totally fine. I mean, most of my baseball experience was played, throwing a tennis ball against a brick wall and having it bounce back at me and just honing my hands and my skills that way. And so just kind of to hear you talk about how, the lack of affordability right now is mind blowing. And I see that as a major hurdle for us. And I thought Fernando's take on kind of the Latin American community and their discomfort with identifying as Black also could be, and again, this is just my limited experience, something that we could figure out a way to be stronger on, because I think there's strength in numbers and strength in all of us coming together to on behalf of the same cause. So that stood out as very true to me, what Fernando was identifying there. And I just think it'd be great to hear LaMonte and about your current experiences.
I mean, I think this whole question just made me just really appreciate my mom and dad, because growing up younger, it did take a lot of time, a lot of energy to go, because the travel ball was so big to be seen, to get experience and to be seen by people. I remember T-ball, that kind of age. I wasn't really the only Black. There was a lot more Black people on the teams on T-ball and Little League, but as soon as you reach high school, I was the only one. College, it was maybe 2 or 3 of us. And now I go through pro ball. It was as far as African Americans, the most African Americans on the team that I played with was probably 3. So just to hear Harold talk about how his teams had 17, 18 African Americans on one team is just, I've never seen it personally. But yeah, I mean, I feel like he's also right with the cost of how much it costs to play. In fact, my zoned high school growing up did not have a baseball team. So I had to go enroll in private school, which cost money for my parents, which again made me think about them. But yeah, just to be able to play baseball, to be seen to go to college and play, and then gratefully get the opportunity to play pro ball. So for me, it's definitely, as a minority, it's definitely been limited African Americans around the room. I feel like the higher you go up, I feel like there was the less pressure though. But the pressure to perform, everything like that, I feel like it is added weight just knowing that there's not too many other African Americans in the room. So I feel like that was kind of my experience.
Can I follow up? This is sort of Fernando's position on it to some degree, but LaMonte, just in our clubhouse now, do you sense that our Latin American players identify as anything other than being from a native Spanish speaking country? Or do you feel like they consider themselves to be a minority? Like, how do you see that?
I feel like that's tough to say. I mean, I haven't really been, I don't know them that well to really answer the question like that. I honestly don't know, Cap. I can't tell you about that one.
What about you, Fernando?
I think the main thing about it, it's like I'm raising it because it's super fascinating, and it's one of these things that does not have a clear solution. It's very, very difficult. Essentially, what you're asking people to do is go on like an individual like identity like odyssey. And what are people actually trying to do? They're trying to go to like a baseball odyssey and like have a 2 ERA, right? So however, it can happen for sure, right? And all of this is about learning, but we're talking about like learning in the course of a 162 game season. You're talking about extremely self-confident people who, like, one of the reasons that you're good is because you're good at baseball is because you're confident and you think you know things, and there are people that have some entirely wrong ideas that they're quite confident about. So that's really, really difficult to say. Team culture also, if you see with our team, I think team culture kind of, a lot of it just sort of forms sort of as this like interesting relationship between like the personalities of your leaders, right? So on our team, we've got some pretty soft spoken, like I always joke and say that our team has a lot of personalities of backup catchers, right? We don't have like a lot of strong, overbearing personalities. We have like a bunch of like humble, sort of down to earth guys, but they're also like quite quiet, right? Like, Buster Posey, very understated. Same with Belt. Craws, like a little bit more like, there's more like flair and more, like
but still quiet, right? Like still a pretty quiet personality in Craw.
Still a quiet personality, right? Those are our 3 veterans. For better or for worse, the way that they play the game and the way that they do things, it informs our culture. Why? Because people like LaMonte come and they see, well, this is what the guys who have been here for 10 years and have won 3 World Series do. So I'm going to kind of assimilate to that to some extent. So, then you have,
and that's universal throughout the game.
That's universal throughout the game. So exactly.
Like you look at when I was coming up, and I want to throw this to Renel because she'll really identify with this. But when I was coming up, when I had so many black players on my team, I took on the personality of a Dave Henderson with some boldness, or I looked across and I saw Ricky Henderson, so I'm going to play a little more swag. It was okay, because he had Dave Parker and Harold Baines, and he had all these other guys on his team as well, and they backed his personality. Or when I was a kid, there was Willie Mays, Willie McCovey, they set that trend. And now, I see Buster Posey. I see, that those personalities are what's driving baseball. And so I think that changes who you're around and allows you to be yourself or not. So back to the question with the Latin players, I played with a lot of guys like Yvonne Calderon was darker than me. He thought he was black. In today's game, he may not feel that way because there's no African-American influence like it was in my game. So I throw this over to you, Renel, I look in the stands and we always talk about, I want to see people that look like me and my kids can identify with them. And when you don't see them, it affects the attendance as well. San Francisco, Oakland, those used to be like black fan havens. And now it's not as robust as it used to be. But in the country, that was like, man, we're going to an A's game. They're going to be playing Tower Power. It's going to be some funk played up in that stadium when I'm taking BP, or San Francisco, same thing. That's changed. So I want to ask you, how's it affected even a fan base?
Well, yeah. Well, I think talking about how Black kids are priced out of, travel ball and the same economic issues that you were talking about for kids coming up are the same that has faced the fan base, and not just the Black fan base, but a lot of people, a lot of diehard season ticket holders at Candlestick got priced out when the new ballpark opened. And there are other sports that, football takes over in the Black community, and particularly with the Warriors and their success. So the interest has kind of shifted. Because as a little girl going to Candlestick Park, I saw Black folks all the time, So that has also changed with the fan base as well. And I hear it on social. I can't afford to take my family to that ballpark and pay $25 for a crab sandwich or whatever it is. So economics come into that with the fan base as well.
But if you had some personality, they'd pay that.
That's right. That's right. So, like I was just thinking when you guys were talking about like my first decade was like Barry Bonds and Michael Tucker and Reggie Sanders and Ray Durham and Fred Lewis and Calvin Murray, for like my first few years there. And, again, if there are no brothers on the team, a lot of Black folks aren't going to be interested, especially when you got, Steph and them doing their thing or the 49ers doing their thing. So I think that has a lot to do, with the fan base being so white, right now. And the other thing too I want to address is the changes that need to be made in the front office, if I may, because this is my 22nd season. I've had 6 bosses, managers of the entertainment department, and they've all been white men. And they just created a new position 2 years ago. And I was told they were having a nationwide search to fill this position. And then I found out that the 5 finalists for this position were all white men in 2019 in San Francisco. And when I asked about the 5 finalists, I was, is there a woman in there? Are there people of color in there? And this particular manager looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language, like he was offended that I was asking the question. And we only have 9 now Black employees in the front office, 3 of which have just been hired in the last couple of years. And again, in San Francisco, where we're looked at as being so diverse and so progressive, that's just not good enough. And it doesn't happen because, like you said earlier, Harold, we're not in the room where it happens. Because here we go to the old boys club. These managers and these vice presidents have been in these roles since the Candlestick years, and they just hire their homies and who they know. We have internship programs that the Black community, communities of color don't know about. And nothing's going to change in that front office until we have more diversity in the front office. I'll just tell you right now, African American Heritage Day is this Saturday. I'm not involved in any meetings. I don't know what's happening. I feel like there's a lot of white people in the room that are planning African American Heritage Day in the lead roles. As a matter of fact, not only are we celebrating Juneteenth, we're also celebrating the 75th anniversary of the Sea Lions. Those are 2 completely separate things. And I feel like, they're both Black related, so we'll throw it into this one day. If we had somebody to look like me that was a executive vice president, maybe Saturday's festivities would look a little different. And it's very frustrating again for me because, being one of like 5 for the first 15 years, and trying to have these conversations, and having had a whole career in broadcasting before I came to the Giants, and being so entrenched in the Black community, I'm like, I'm right here. I'm right here. I know folks. I have resources. Every time I would approach the subject, nobody's listening to me. So we have to get into these executive positions and make some changes in the front office too. And then maybe we can address why the attendance is so low in communities of color. But just a bunch of white folks in the executive offices making decisions that we don't really have any say in.
Harold, do you have similar experiences from what Renel's describing in like not being in the room on issues that you have probably the most experience in, and then not being sort of leaned on to make good decisions for the network? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I would say I agree with that, but I've seen a shift. And I've been invited in. I think a lot of it had to do with where we're at, so I've been invited in to be able to have a voice. But again, I'm a male. We don't have women coming in with these opinions too. She's got a double blade against her. She's Black and she's a female. And so that has to be addressed even more so. The wisest people I've ever known in my life that influenced me are my mother and my grandmother, two Black women. So they have strong opinions and strong thoughts. So I think that's got to happen. But for me directly, I've been real fortunate to be in a position on TV where I can say things. But I go back to, all the uprising that happened has really kind of pushed it out to the forefront. Like, well, Harold's a Black guy. You got to talk about this. What do you think, Harold? I got asked. So I got to speak. But I give credit to Commissioner Manford, who's called me. We've had dialogue about whether it was moving the game out of Atlanta, whether it was opening day, George Floyd Day coming up, whatever it is, he's engaged. He's reached out and really kind of put me in his circle. So I've been real fortunate with that. And as a result, I've been able to have a little more footing at the network on, hold it, what are we doing? Why are we not doing it this way or that way, or not saying things? So that world has kind of changed a lot. I've seen a huge shift in the last 2 to 3 years with that, with those type of things for me, which I look at as a positive. And if you're looking at the network now, you're starting to see all of a sudden you see Chris Young show up, and here comes CC Sabathia, and you're starting to see some players of color and more females hosting shows other than just quick pitch. And so there's been a shift. And it's good to see, because we needed to make that shift. And I think you're going to see a floodgate open. So the philosophy's changed quite a bit. And I got to give them credit. We've had a lot of shifting with a lot of people getting let go and different people put in positions of influence or power. And that's helped. But yeah, that's kind of been a shift that I'm starting to see. But I think where Renel's at, it's happening across the league. We got to have big changes. One of the things that has really helped, I think, a lot has been the Players Alliance, where they've been able to have meetings directly with owners. Curtis Granderson, CC Sabathia, myself, number of people have met directly with all 30 owners and been able to tell them, here it is, being able to have their group. And Christina, who runs that joint for them, has really had great one-on-one dialogue too, where they have a panel of owners, about 6 to 8 owners who are really fighting for their causes with the ownership. So we're in the midst of seeing some things start to change now. But so starting to see some things start to happen, which is taking a long time. Hadn't happened before. Long time.
Renel, I'm curious, hearing some of the frustration come out. How confident are you that, let's say, people in the Giants organization, by way of example, feel, sense, and understand that frustration?
I feel like last summer they heard it. But here we are, we're back to square one. Again, the fact that I'm not even involved in planning African American Heritage Day, which, you know, these are the things we talked about last summer. And yeah, and it's super frustrating, you know, especially after everybody pledged to do so much better. I mean, and I could give you a laundry list of experiences and situations I've been through over there in 21 years that are definitely frustrating, but also extremely disrespectful and just being dismissed a lot of times on certain things. Yeah, so there's 3 white men that run my department, and after last summer and having these uncomfortable conversations, I've heard from one of them, since April. So.
Well, I look at it this way though, Renel, I want to encourage you, because you wouldn't have been able to speak up 2 years ago, and be heard. Now you're starting to be heard. At least you got one listening.
No, that's true.
That's a change. But I mean, we've known each other a long time. Just for you to freely be able to speak right now, is a change.
That's true.
That part of the reason that we don't see change is people are they're inhibited to speak on a format like this, on a forum like this, to really speak openly like you have, because you're worried about, well, I don't know if I can really say that, and no telling what's coming around the corner. But you've made it clear already ahead of time, so that frees you up to be able to speak. And because of that, there's a change. And that's how I look at it. There's a change. You're sitting on a call with the manager of the Giants, and we're talking about the organization openly. That just doesn't happen. And I think that's because you've had direct conversations with Larry Bear, and it's giving you the freedom to say, all right, I've already told him I'm going to be saying this. And that gives you freedom. So that's a change. That's how I look at it.
You're right. You're absolutely right. That is a change. And I've also been very vocal on social media, more so than ever in the last year and a half. And, a lot of my followers have applauded me for being, courageous, and like calling out MLB and calling out the Giants, in a professional and respectful way, of course. But it's not courageous. It's like, if I didn't do it, I wouldn't be able to live with myself. My dad was the first high school Black principal in San Francisco, and one of the first Black students to get a master's at UC Berkeley. So I come from a trailblazer, and I come from an activist who was very active in community organizations and the NAACP and Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. That's how I was raised. So, if my dad were still here, last year, he would have been saying, jump on this, let's go. So it's not courageous. It's just what I feel. I'm in a position where I need to speak out. And again, I couldn't live with myself. I didn't say anything. So you're right, Harold. It is a change. But I am frustrated because, it's exhausting to keep talking about it, and changes. And I understand change is slow, but it is frustrating and it is tiresome. It's, especially approaching Saturday. And I'm like, I thought we talked about this last year, but you're right. And thank you for saying that and helping me realize that is a difference. To have conversations with Larry every other week, to know Gabe and to have Gabe's support is completely different. So you're right about that.
And you need to have backing too, because to continue to keep that on the forefront of things. So I'm glad I know about it, because I'll speak up too. Good.
Thank you, brother.
It is you're torch bearing, and it's frustrating to torch bear because there's so much going on that is it's not none of this is our responsibility, but here we are, good Samaritans seeing like what needs to be done sometimes, right? But it's not your responsibility, but it often gets put on you, right? You're invited into the room, and then people say, something has happened. Let us turn I think this is when we turn to the Black person and ask them what they think, and promptly ignore them also, usually, because that's just kind of how it is, which is, very, very frustrating. I think right now, what specifically frustrates me the most is the trendy sort of like box ticking sorts of things that are meant to kind of make us like ply us over, right? And we have to be very careful about that. That's like kind of what, to me, the most interesting part of what LaMonte was saying, and Renel as well, about, you know, keeping the foot on the gas. And again, to me, that's just like learning about a lot of this stuff, just learning about, and really just like learning history, like learning what happened. And that to me is also just especially what, you know, Juneteenth is and why people are scared of it. The reason people are scared of Juneteenth is because they don't want Black people and white people together gathering around and talking about like what this actually is, right? What it actually is, like what, 100 years away, you know? So yeah, that's just.
Well, you know, it's funny you bring up the Juneteenth thing too, because, you know, Lincoln had freed the slaves, and yet Texas did not allow that to happen for like 2.5 years. So even though the proclamation was written and declared, it did not, you still had people holding folks hostage, basically, in slavery and not letting them out. And so that took time to fight through that. And yes, we had an awakening last summer, and some things are breaking through, but yet there's still a lot of things, as Renel was telling her story, that are still being held in that bondage that needs to continue to break. It's going to break. It's going to break. You just got to hang in there. And it's such it just hits right here at Juneteenth so much that the South was basically slaves. You go, you're free, and they're still holding them hostage in Texas, which was at that time part of the South. But you know, that's what's happening right now. You're still fighting through. If I talk to somebody else in another organization, they may have had that breakthrough already. You know, like I feel like I've had somewhat of a breakthrough and been able to have an influence and be able to make some change.
I heard this thing about, you know, Juneteenth, that people say that you're, you know, supposed to, there's a celebratory aspect of it, right? Where it's almost like a tour of Black people going around the country, being happy, being jubilant, expressing that, you know, their happiness for being free, but also, you know, looking back and thinking about all the work that still needs to be done. Today, there is slavery that exists on the planet, plenty of it. And there are many strains of indentured servitude still growing wild all over the planet. You know, so, you know, that for me, another further reason to kind of, you know, do whenever we can do our best to sort of resist the, you know, sort of like trendy, sort of symbolic kinds of things, and really keep your foot on the gas in terms of just, you know, sharing more of these stories, right? As Black people, we sort of sit with that, with, as, you know, sometimes wanting to kind of do a lot of work, essentially emotional work, and like trying to help people understand things, and then also taking a break, because that will also make you, you know, make you crazy. You know, and it's not a responsibility, but it can be really, really powerful. And I think we all, you know, sit and think about that. I just know for sure LaMonte has just been sitting with a baseball uniform at times being like, oh my God, this guy needs to hear this. But like, I got a game, or you know what I mean? Or it's a day game.
I've been noticing there's lots of T-shirts and different merchandise with the word free-ish, like Black-ish, free-ish, because for all intents and purposes, you know, slavery ended, but discrimination and racism and Jim Crow, that didn't end. And as we approach Juneteenth 2021, you know, we're still fighting the same stuff: voter suppression, police brutality, Jim Crow, redlining, racism. So like free-ish is the word in 2021. And that's something that we have to let folks know. Yes, it's my mom's from Texas, so it's always been celebrated, you know, in my house and everything. But yeah, it was a celebratory day. But lest we not forget, Texas was the last state, you know, so that plantation owners could get through harvest season, and they withheld the news and everything. So we need to really completely educate folks about the holiday, particularly now that it's on the verge of becoming a national holiday, a federal holiday. And I was going back and forth on Twitter with some folks yesterday because we have mixed emotions about it. It's kind of like our holiday, right? And do we want white folks getting a day off without acknowledging what the day means, you know? So we got mixed emotions around all of that. But I say all that to say that we've got to keep pushing the education of what the holiday is. Because a lot of folks just think slavery ended with the Emancipation Proclamation, and nothing could be further from the truth. And again, June 19th, 1865, June 19th, 2021, free-ish. Just saying.
You know, it's interesting, the debate on do they celebrate that day as well. But I come back to where we started. You know, if we don't have Gabe Kaplers of the world involved in a movement, it doesn't ever change. So, I mean, we can go back to the civil rights movements, and you go back and look at some of the footage, and you see even the March on Washington and the conversations. You see people getting off buses. A lot of white people were involved in that too. And so I think as we come full circle, it is, we all are in this together. And the only way we're going to get by it is everybody's going to have to collectively be able to do it. And that's why the dynamic of those Major League locker rooms was so interesting to me last year. Fernando touched on the Latin players. We had a lot of white players that didn't want to hold a ribbon either, or put a BLM on their jersey, you know, that had to come around. And it was some tough conversations in some of those locker rooms, and in understanding why this was happening. And I really feel like this generation has a greater hope than any generation ever before, because it's so multiracial. It's so multicultural. It's so multi-everything, that you have women coaches, you have gay players, you have, you name it, across the board. There's a cross section that's torn down all the macho things that stood forever in this country. Like, this is what an athlete is. You know, this is the right way. We're tearing all those walls down. And that's this generation. And I think that's why I'm hopeful of a Juneteenth celebration, or any of these celebrations, that it is this generation that's going to bring it forward, because they're going to understand a unity message and a solidarity way more than even the generation that I'm in. So that's why I'm hopeful.
Despite all of the terrible things that we've done to them, this generation is growing to be like the most tolerant and et cetera ever. So yes, it is hopeful. That is I'm glad that you reminded me of that.
Me too. It's true.
Me too. And I just want to make sure, LaMonte, if you have anything else on your mind.
Yeah, you got to shout out.
I think everybody else has kind of shared a lot of perspective, and I think it's great for all of us. But I just want to make sure, as that generation that Fernando and Harold and Renel are talking about now, you have the floor here from it if you have anything else on your mind.
Like you said, the more that we can celebrate, you know, African American like heritage, African American culture, the players in this game, I think the more that we'll get fans, Black fans involved, and get in these communities. Like Renel said, I think we need to go out in the communities, whether that's anybody, like myself, anybody, we just be willing to get out in the community, show our faces, you know, so that they can come out and see that, hey, there is an African American who plays for the Giants, you know, I can do that too one day. You know, I want to play baseball now, anything like that. You know, I mean, it only takes one guy to, you know, go out there and spread a message to, you know, maybe influence anybody. So, I mean, it's definitely going to take strength in numbers. I think the Players Alliance has been doing a great job. We didn't get to get out to San Francisco last year because it was closed, but I'm pretty sure that we'll be able to get out to San Francisco this off season. So right now we can probably get together with that, and maybe can come out to Oracle. But there's definitely a lot of things that need to be done. Definitely need to keep spreading the message. I feel like this is a great way of doing it. Also, you know, this conversation. So anytime that we can talk about and spread awareness, I think help us get closer to that goal.
Good stuff, young man. You know, Mookie Betts was the only Black player in the World Series last year. And in talking to Mookie, this is again the generation that we're in, and why I'm encouraged. Some people might have looked at it as a negative, but I asked him a question after the World Series game. I said, Mookie, what do you think about being the only African American player in the World Series? And when did you learn that? And he goes, I just learned it. And so you can look at it a couple ways. One, you can look at it like you didn't know. And the other part is you can look at it like you didn't know because he's so immersed in playing, but he's been accepted and accepted his teammates, and they're not looking at Mookie as a black player. They're looking at him as Mookie Betts. So that's a positive. But a negative is that he was the only one, and we need to have more representation of that across the board. There's probably more players from Australia in the big leagues than there were African-American players growing up in the country that the game was supposedly created in. So we got to work on it.
He wasn't the only black player. There was just a bunch of Latino blacks that opted out.
There you go.
Which is, I'm not attacking them. I'm just stating that as the truth, and that like there are many, many reasons for that. It in and of itself is a 2-hour quantity.
No, I think it's interesting too. I mean, it's funny. Last year I was on with Pedro Martinez, and I was going into this whole thing about black players. And he went, time out, I'm black. And I went, okay, yeah, you are. And he went into talking about his stuff that he'd gone through, because you're looking at skin tone is what a lot of racism is. They're not walking in and you're going into somewhere and they can just, they judge you on your skin tone, and it doesn't matter what your native tongue might be. And all of a sudden he starts speaking Spanish. That didn't all of a sudden change the fact that he was judged by his skin color. And so what did Martin Luther King say? I want to be judged by the content of your character. And that's really where we need to get to as a body, as a country, as people.
Cool. I want to be respectful of all your time. And I just want to express just a quick note of gratitude. I feel really lucky to be on this panel with all of you, and feel really lucky that you gave your time today, and look forward to connecting with all of you guys in various ways.
Thanks, Gabe. Thanks for establishing the foundation. Thanks for this conversation.